Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to cover for you guys a topic that, yes, I've covered this in the past, and I'll probably cover it quite a few times in the future because it's a topic that people ask about a lot. And I think it's one that creates a lot of confusion for people, especially as they're transitioning from a novice or an intermediate to a more advanced lifter. You know, they will start to ask things like, how far apart should my squat and my deadlift be? And people need to understand why the ratios change the longer that you lift. Because it's a fascinating topic and it's something that your body composition will impact the ratios on. And I think that throws people off quite a bit too. So when it comes to our squat and our deadlift, and guys, please don't go in the comments asking about this lifter or that lifter, because that's one of those that people need to understand when you are dealing with world record holding power lifters. They're oftentimes structural outliers. There's a reason they have a world record in one of these lifts. And they might actually be terrible at one of the others relative to it. Okay? So don't bring those up. They're irrelevant to the topic. This does not affect you, and it probably will never affect anybody that you coach or train in your life, even if you're a professional. Okay? Those are outliers. And there are reasons. We could get into that, but that's a separate topic, which I've covered before. But what you guys will notice as a general rule, your deadlift very early on in your training will be much stronger than your squat, okay? Especially by probably the end of your first year. It's not uncommon for someone to reach a 400 deadlift before they reach a 300 squat. And I think that messes with a lot of guys' heads, particularly guys with longer legs. Particularly guys with longer legs. They will notice that very quickly. But then they'll see people who are really advanced and they go, well, how come your squats and deadlifts are so close together? Right? Because you guys see me here even doing just chain work, and I represent a very advanced lifter. You guys will notice that I technically am using, at my heaviest sets here, I have more chains on the squat than on the deadlift, right? At this heaviest set, there's like actually 30 pounds more chain on the squat. But the lifts themselves, as far as the bar weight, are only about 10% apart, maybe a little more, right? And that's generally what you see with an advanced lifter. It is very, very common for a normal height proportionate advanced lifter to have a squat and a deadlift that are within 10% of each other, unless they are way, way, way more structurally built for one of the lifts than the others. Okay. So why is that? Well, it has to do with the fact that the squat is more reliant upon muscle mass. Okay, it's very, very simple. The deadlift is more reliant on leverages than the squat is. I'm not saying leverages don't matter. Leverages matter on every exercise that you do, including a dumbbell curl. Okay. In fact, I would argue that the dumbbell concentration curl is the most leverage-oriented exercise you'll probably ever find. Ironically. The reason two guys with the same size bicep, one of them can do 10 strict reps with a double the size dumbbell as the other one. The length of his forearm, right? It matters. It matters a lot. But leverages. The deadlift is more leverage oriented, and the deadlift doesn't rely upon sheer muscle mass as much. In fact, all the research on the deadlift shows that it scales to body weight less than any other classic lift. Literally. Which is ironic because it uses the most muscles in the body. But the muscles involved in the deadlift, a lot of the primary movers of limit muscles tend to be muscles that are very difficult to hypertrophy, and it doesn't use anything through a full range of motion. Okay, so it's very easy to build up a deadlift quickly. And it's good for boosting the ego of new lifters, because a deadlift is the best test of strength because it's not reliant upon body weight, okay? Not relying on body weight. Body fat does not give you any advantages on the deadlift. And it is largely just reliant upon the muscles of the posterior chain to determine your maxes. Other muscles contribute less. But it's less reliant upon muscle mass, more reliant upon leverages and just getting muscles strong at the right joint angles, having a strong back. Right? I can get most lifters to a 500 deadlift without actually even training what you would think of as a deadlift or classic lifts. You just overdevelop their entire posterior chain. They'll get there in their grip. But it's not as reliant upon body weight and muscle mass. In other words, every pound of muscle that you gain on the deadlift will not be proportionate to the strength increase, especially through your entire body. The squat, much like the bench press, is extremely muscle mass reliant. It's a longer range of motion exercise. Okay. It is more reliant upon the amount of muscle mass in your hips and in your quads. And these are big muscles. And what do we know about big muscles? Big muscles take a long time to develop. They take a very long time to develop. When we look at the data on the squat, and this has been confirmed, guys, there's been a pretty big study involving a lot of big names that studied over 200 lifters, experienced lifters, ranging from physique competitors to power lifters to everyone else. And they found that they could determine your max squat with a DEXA scan of your body. What? In other words, the more muscle you have through your whole body, with a bias towards the lower body relative to your height, and they developed a coefficient to calculate height in, which height is largely determined by your leg length, by the way. Your torso contributes way less to height differences person to person. A lot of people are unaware of that. A lot of people are unaware of that, by the way. Human leg length varies far more than torso length does in both men and women. It's your legs mostly. So when they factor in height, they were able to look at muscle mass and guess someone's max squat within 10%. Well, it takes time to build those muscles. It takes a lot of time. It takes years to fully develop your quads and your glutes and things like that, right? It does. And the support musculature involved, right? Because we need more support musculature for the squat. It's a longer range of motion lift than the deadlift. The other thing that has to be factored in, and this is where it gets tricky with body composition and where you put muscle. On the deadlift, as a general rule, anything that gets in the way, bigger quads, a bigger belly, can interfere with your max deadlift, right? Fat guys lose weight off their deadlift. A lot of guys will say, well, what about this world's strongest man? He's got a monstrous deadlift. Well, these are outliers. But number two, if his gut were to magically disappear, his deadlift might go up 50 or 100 pounds. Let that sink in. His actual belly gets in the way. Right? So a lot of things that make you thicker can make your deadlift more difficult because they can affect your ability to get into the ideal start position. Right? Anything that makes you take a wider stance on a conventional deadlift will reduce the conventional deadlift. So some of these big strong men who are like, well, that guy deadlifts 900 pounds with his big belly. If he lost the belly and he could take a narrower stance and a narrower grip, his 900 would probably turn into 1,000. With the squat, anything that makes you thicker tends to improve your squat. So as we get bigger, we get more ability to rebound out of the bottom of a squat. Okay? Bigger quads in certain points can rebound off of a guy's big old belly. Fat guys tend to squat more. But even if you're not, if you're leaner, adding more muscle gives you more pop out of the bottom of a squat on things like your hamstrings, calves, all that stuff. So when you think in those terms, the more muscle you gain and the more support musculature, so you have a thicker core, thicker back, all that stuff helps you stay stable on the squat. It lets you handle bigger and bigger weights. As your hamstrings and calves and all of those muscles get bigger, it can actually create a spring effect out of the bottom. What? Yeah. So as you gain more size, your ability to squat goes up. It goes up. Well, what do we gain more of over the years? Size. And the extra muscle that we gain over the years just simply doesn't contribute as much to the deadlift as it does to the squat. So that's why at a certain point in your training, after you've been training hard for a year, if you have normal proportions, it's not uncommon for your deadlift to be 20 or 25% higher than your squat. In some cases, 30%, right? You guys know what I'm talking about? A lot of you guys are like, man, I could barely squat 300 when I got to a 400 deadlift. Yeah, that's over a 30% difference. But then as you get more and more experienced, what happens? The same lifter over the course of several years might hit a 500 squat and only have a 560 or a 570 deadlift. Okay? We're not much more than 10% apart. Then what happens? You get more and more advanced. You become elite. The same lifter might end up with a 600 squat and a 650 deadlift. We're now less than 10% gap at that point. Okay, that happens. It's an issue of muscle mass. Muscle mass and size contribute more to the squat than they do to the deadlift. They contribute to both. It's just that it contributes less. So the bigger you get, the closer the gap gets between the two. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.